Garry, what's up?
What up, brother?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. Come on in.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, dude. This is going to be a fun conversation.
It'll be good.
Today, we're in Los Angeles, California, and we'll be sitting down with Brian Armstrong, founder and CEO of Coinbase.
Well, Brian, thanks for hanging out, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Where do you even start? I mean, obviously we're on the other side of an incredible IPO. Congratulations, man.
Thank you.
I don't know how to thank you enough. I don't know, just even being able to meet you and be a part of what you created. It's, unbelievable.
It's mutual. You helped me out a ton in the early days. I don't know if people know that, but you were kind of like my first CEO coach. You made a big investment at the time in Coinbase before it was really obvious. And it was just me kind of showing you a bunch of numbers on a screen and what do you think about this and this? And you were giving me advice every week and I'd come back. And I remember at a certain point you saw some numbers from some growth experiment and you were like, you should show that to investors. I mean, it makes me want to invest. So it might make them want to invest. And it kind of a light bulb went off in my head. It was like, would Garry invest? So
yeah, totally.
Anyway, you took a big bet on me as well. And you were always just so optimistic about everybody's startups when they were super young and early. That's my biggest memory of you actually from Y Combinator is like, you were championing everybody when they had these beta, barely functional products and you were like their first customer and you had their t-shirt and like a bit of motivation, like an early customer who actually believes in the product can go a long ways in the early days. So thank you as well.
Dude, I appreciate that. I mean, that's what gets me up in the morning is believing before people believe and then helping people believe themselves. But then what you do after that is you just go and make everyone else believe after that. How crazy is that?
It can be kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, actually. Like just having somebody else believe in you can make you believe in yourself. And there's a lot to that. Like a lot of good ideas probably just die on the vine because, people belittle them or they make fun of them or they assume it'll never work. And so having someone actually believe in your ideas is non-trivial.
The interesting and hard thing though is to believe something that can be true. How did you know that early?
About crypto and Bitcoin?
Yeah, about crypto. And I mean, it sounds like there were things from places you worked at before that sort of started to inform that.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you never really know for sure, right? I remember having moments of self-doubt where I was like, maybe I'm crazy, because nobody else seems to really get this if I explain it to them. I hear some people, they make business ideas today where they're sort of doing like almost like a consultant type analysis or a financial analysis and like, this is the TAM and here's the competitor set. And so I believe and for me, it wasn't like that at all. I basically just read the white paper and I was like, that's cool, the Bitcoin white paper. And I kind of couldn't get it out of my head. And so it wasn't like I had some really sophisticated analysis of the market potential. There was no market for it. It was basically just, I think this seems like a good idea. It seems like it's interesting to me. And so maybe it'll be interesting to other people. And I was trying to think about all the ways that it could die. Would it be regulated out of existence? Would there be some kind of cybersecurity flaw? And the more I talked to people about it, I couldn't find any obvious reason that would happen. So I didn't know for sure that it would work, but I felt like there was a high enough chance that it was worth making a go of it. And you're right, my prior work experience definitely did give me a little bit of an insight into that. Working on fraud prevention at Airbnb, I'd seen how difficult it was to move money around all these countries, both collecting money from customers and then also paying it out to the people who were listing their homes on the site. And it was like every single country of the world had their own little proprietary system with a couple of entrenched, oligopoly companies that were charging opaque fees. And it just felt like this thing is never gonna get rid of all the bureaucracy and actually be innovated unless there's a new system. I was thinking about it in terms of the internet, right? It wouldn't make sense for each country to have their own proprietary internet and you pay a fee when you want to load a web page from another country or something. It's like, let's all just run the world on one standard. It felt so beautiful and elegant to me. So those were some things which gave me a little bit of a hint that maybe it would work. And I knew enough computer science and enough economics that, not that I was an expert in any of it, but I was like, after I read the paper a few times, I was like, this might work.
I guess the crazy thing that I remember, I went into my email and dug up the first mention of your name in my inbox, and it was actually Garry Tan at Sif Science.
Yeah.
And the line that really jumped out at me was that you were at Airbnb debugging with Jason at 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was the moment where I was like, YC needs to fund Brian. It's like anyone who loves the craft so much that, at 2 a.m., you're on, like your brain is engaged in something that is, useful towards a goal. I mean, that really resonated with me as a founder, because those were the times when I did my absolute best work. You'd wake up and it's like, whoa, I wrote all that code, or I figured out this crazy thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that actually a lot of founders have weird sleep schedules. It's not that they're all like night owls. Some of them are super early too, it doesn't mean like if you have a normal sleep schedule, you're not a good founder, but I think anybody could probably be a founder. But I have noticed that there's some people, they're working during the day and there's like so many emails and meetings and you're distracted. And so they need like a period of time, whether it's super early or super late, where there's nothing else scheduled and you can kind of just dig in. And yeah, Garry Tan, I remember at that time, Sif Science was this great startup, YC startup that was doing fraud prevention with machine learning. And at Airbnb, I was trying to prevent some of the fraud that was happening. And so I had looked at a couple of different solutions and what would it take to build our own. I was like, these guys seem like they have a good product. And it was like, all right, let's hook it up. Let's debug it. And so I was kind of coding the whole thing and like talking with them and going through their API docs. And it was just a convenient time to get work done, like late at night, because, there were so many things happening during the day. But yeah, there definitely were times in my life where I got so deep in the code and I wanted to get it working and it was fun. There's other times where you get deep in the code and like nothing is working and it's so incredibly frustrating. And 2 hours later, you're like, oh, it was like one character was different. And it's like, so it was a labor of love. And I loved building stuff like that. And so, yeah, I definitely got super into it.
Yeah, I mean, I love that story just because a lot of people who are watching, like they look at what you've created and they're like, all desire is so mimetic, especially in terms of creating companies and becoming a founder. But I feel like that's like the common thread is being a builder, being very focused on, it's not the technology on its own, it's not the problem on its own, and it's probably not the sleep schedule, but something about like all of that entering a flow state and then having this outcome.
Yeah. Other people have written more eloquently about this than me, but there is something about this desire or this ability to like look at the world and say, okay, this is how things are, but they could be different, and not to just dismiss the idea out of hand because it's so ridiculous. So there's it's almost like be able to suspend disbelief for a minute and be like, okay, maybe this could work. That's one kind of characteristic. And then I think that builder characteristic is super important too. People who are, PG wrote a lot about this and everything, right? Remarkably determined and resilient people that are just like, setback after setback, and they're just like, I'm going to keep going, because startups are certainly like that. So I think the builder piece is interesting too. Like the ability to code helps. I don't think it's necessarily 100% required, but the reason it helps is that, when you're on a shoestring budget and you've only raised a tiny amount of money, and you maybe only have 1 or 2 or 3 people, you could, in theory, hire a firm to build your app, right? But you almost never get the first version of the product right. And so if you're kind of overpaying, so to speak, like there's some high-priced firm to build the app, and then you get the first version wrong, which everybody does, and then you get the second version wrong, which almost everybody does, and then you're on the third version, you're out of money and you're dead. And so I guess it was almost like a way to save money if I just coded it myself. And I remember, for instance, like, I wasn't very good at design, for instance, but I kind of scraped together things as best I could, either using like Twitter Bootstrap, or there were even like some people, some friends at YC who like, I remember one of the people like created my logo for me or whatever, just as a favor. So it was kind of beg, borrow, and steal and try to get something out. And then if you iterate, you got product market fit, then you can start to bring in enough people to get better and better stuff happening. But in the early days, there was just so few people who would even come join my thing that like had to make something happen with whatever I had.
One thing I remember about your version of Coinbase in 2012 was it was the perfect idiomatic expression of bootstrap, I guess.
Yeah.
It's like, it looked like Twitter, actually. So
yeah, it wasn't by any means the most beautiful site, but it was functional and it had something about it that it wasn't sketchy. It wasn't gonna win any awards, but it wasn't like a huge detractor of the design either. So,
but that seemed like a very important thing from the beginning, making sort of a clean, well-lit place to actually buy this stuff and interact with it. It was interesting to see, like a lot of people had the idea of, I want to do something with Bitcoin, but for you to pick like something so specific as a problem set, that wasn't, and to actually have built it and like started sending Bitcoin
Yeah.
around with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was so like many people, I downloaded the Bitcoin client, which was desktop software, and it had a command line interface, right? And I started syncing my node on my MacBook. Like that was the first version of it that I tried. And I knew that just that wasn't going to scale to be a large number of people who would want to do that. For one thing, it took a while to sync to the blockchain, right? It reminded me also kind of like email servers or Git servers, because you could run your own email server, but nobody wants to. They want to run Gmail or something in the cloud. It works on your phone, and if you lose your phone, your email's not gone or whatever. And same thing with Git. Git is hard to use, but GitHub made it easier. So those were sort of my analogies, and I had this thought like, someone's going to make the hosted wallet in the cloud thing for crypto. I was sort of trying to talk myself out of that, actually, because I was like, that's a really big responsibility. That's going to be a big company that does that. You're going to be storing people's money. You're going to have regulation. And so my early prototypes were like, actually, with a friend, I made this Bitcoin wallet that ran on an Android phone and tried to just make it easier to use. And we got a version of it out, but I realized, really like the day we launched it, I realized it was built wrong, because it was trying to run the full Bitcoin node on the phone. And so even if you were on Wi-Fi, it still took like hours to sync. And I was like, all right, someone's going to make the cloud version of this. I couldn't help myself. I just started tinkering with stuff and put it out there. So
That's an interesting idea, thought pattern that seems to come up a lot. Like, someone's going to do X, and so I'd rather be that.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of truth to that. You notice there's like some big issue in the world, or some, schlep you had to go through, I think people call it, right? Sometimes you're like, man, that was such a pain. Someone's gonna have to do this. And then weeks go by and you're like, maybe I should do it. I just solved it for myself. Maybe others need the same thing solved.
I wanted to ask you about, crypto and Bitcoin in particular attracted, you had to be a part of a fringe to accept it that early. But then even within that fringe, there were ideas that were not useful or turned out to be wrong. One of which I think was being totally anonymous or pseudonymous at all times. And you had to sort of you made a different decision for yourself very early. I'm curious, because that's like to create a fringe within a fringe that became Coinbase.
Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of cypherpunks kind of at those early Bitcoin meetups that I went to, and of course, Satoshi was anonymous. And so I think some people were of the opinion, we're all going to do 100% anonymous here. And I don't have any issue with that. I think actually the future is probably pseudo-anonymity, or kind of like on Reddit, you have a username, you can declare bankruptcy and create a new one. Your reputation goes away too, but I think that's probably going to be the future. But for starting a company, it's kind of different than what an individual might want, right? And I knew that if this company was going to ask people to put in their credit card or their bank account or to store their crypto, then it wouldn't be okay for me to be anonymous, right? I also just kind of went through the thought exercise, which was, okay, if this thing is small, it can probably fly under the radar, no one's going to care. But if I don't want to build a small thing, I want to build a thing that like helps the whole world use crypto so we can create more economic freedom and all this. So if this gets to millions of people, there's no way I can be anonymous. Like I knew enough from reading kind of about the history of PayPal and working at Airbnb, doing this money movement stuff, that there's regulation involved. And like, I was not willing to sort of be on the run and never come back to the United States or something like that. I was like, I have friends here, I have family here. I want to be, I need to do this like above board from day one if I'm going to do it. And so I felt like I wanted to create all of these credibility indicators actually about the company, even when it was very tiny. Design is a little thing, how support works. I even remember having on the about page, I had like press at and like sales at and like random email addresses. And I was like the only person in the company. So I was trying to create, and like, news articles and putting my actual name, who created it, and putting it on my LinkedIn. And so they can go read about my background. And I'm not trying to hide here. I'm not trying to be anonymous. And getting into Y Combinator, getting certain investors, like these were all little credibility indicators that started to accumulate to help us, I think, break through some of the noise.
You sort of used a way of thinking that was, if we get there, we're going to need to have this, right?
Yeah.
And so you had to sort of presuppose you could get to millions of users and then work backwards from there.
Totally.
That, I think, is actually relatively rare for a lot of people. Like they sort of don't focus on the outcome. They sort of, and believe that they can get to the outcome. They focus on looking like a startup, And that's sort of like just the beginning part of it. It's like
Yeah.
that, that's putting the cart before the horse in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, there's probably a way to take that too far, which is like, if you're so worried about having this beautiful product and everything's perfect and that you never launch in the first place, right? So startups do kind of have to fake it till you make it. You can't be too precious about it. But yeah, if there's an opportunity to create some kind of legitimacy along the way, certainly take it, I think.
I mean, even going earlier, technology and software and computers have treated both of us incredibly well. What was your first computer and first interaction with just, tech, period?
Well, I feel very lucky on that front because I grew up in a home where my mother actually worked at IBM. She would take me to work at sometimes, and I got to see computers, and we got some of the early IBM 386 and 486 PCs in the home. This was kind of growing up in the Bay Area in California. And so that was pre-internet, but I learned how to use DOS and play little games on the computer and things like that at a pretty young age. And I think it wasn't until the internet happened, and I remember we first got dial-up internet and then DSL and everything, that I really started to get excited about it, and I started to try to learn how to make HTML and web pages. I remember reading this book on how to learn Java in 21 days, and I was probably in 8th grade or something, and I completely didn't understand any of it, and I completely failed, to understand it. But then I got HTML, and I was like, all right, HTML is simpler. I can learn that first.
That happened exactly. I mean, that book,
yeah,
and then HTML in that order, actually.
Really?
Yeah, totally.
That's so funny.
At Barnes and Noble, just go to maybe we ran into each other. No, where was this in California?
This was in San Jose, California. So
see, right down the street in Fremont. So.
Yeah, I mean, there was something very special happening right there in the world at that time, and I remember, actually the very first job I had in high school, there at the library, there was somebody had put a piece of paper on the wall saying they wanted an intern to help develop their website. And so it was this guy's garage in San Jose, kind of a cliche startup thing. And that was my first job in high school. I was, making a little bit of money trying to build his website. And it was a remarkable moment in time historically. Looking back, that we were in that primordial soup, and I meet people now who they grew up and they had never even seen a computer. They saw a photo of one in a magazine or something, and then they knew they wanted to be in computers, and they applied to college, and they got in, and they got a computer science degree, having never even seen a computer in real life, which is kind of amazing. But I guess I feel very lucky to have had early access to it.
It's the bicycle for the mind, as they say.
Yeah, and there was something about it, frankly, I was a very shy, kind of awkward kid. I was not good with people. And so I liked being on a computer by myself and reading books, and it felt kind of exciting to use it. And I remember the first time in high school, I had a little bit of a glimmer of I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I was learning all kinds of things. I was taking some music lessons, and I was studying doing all this stuff in high school, whatever. And I remember making this website in high school. It was actually a friend of mine. He and I were trying to resell computer hardware or something. We had a PayPal account, and we made a simple website. And I remember I went to sleep one night. I woke up in the morning, and the little hit counter was 500 people had visited the website while we were sleeping. And I was like, that's the coolest thing ever, because it was almost like a superpower. I was asleep, but something I created was helping serve the world in 500 people even, which I could never do one-on-one. And so that gave me such a kind of a rush. And I remember going into college and thinking, I think I kind of want to do something in business and computers or something.
I mean, the crazy thing now is, even thinking about this video is going to be interesting because there might be hundreds of thousands of people who watch it. And then can you visualize right now being in a stadium with 200,000 people or something like that? It's, it's kind of insane.
It's the printing press of our day to give distribution. The internet changed all of our lives in terms of that, just connecting people and having such an impact on anything you do and create.
And then now, I mean, it's actually the internet is eating money, and you have created one of the one of the keystones of that. And so, I don't know, where do we go from there? How crazy is that that we get to live in this time when money went from this row-locked thing in a database someplace to something that is actually distributed and sort of everywhere and not owned by a single entity.
Yeah, I mean, I think people underappreciate that, just how powerful that could be to kind of take what the internet did for information, sort of democratizing it, anybody could publish and do that for money. Because before the internet, it's like there was all these gatekeepers. Publishing information was expensive. It's like you needed to convince some studio executive to be on your TV show, or get a gig at a radio station that broadcast to 1,000 miles, or a newspaper was these incredibly powerful institutions. And so suddenly anybody could do that. And so people think money pretty much works today. And in some ways it does. I can swipe my credit card or whatever and buy a coffee. But in other ways, we're stuck in the era of radio, television, and newspaper. And if we just make it so seamless where anybody around the world can participate in this global economy, and payments are instant and they're global and they're cheap and they're fast, like I think just so much is going to be unlocked from that. And you can see little glimmers of it. Like in China, for instance, they have WeChat, right? And WeChat payments are really seamless. You can do micropayments, they're instant, they're pretty much free. And we see all these little business models just flourishing on WeChat. And that's just one country. It's a large country, but it's one country. So what would happen if we can connect everybody in the globe onto a payment system like that? I mean, you're talking about like orders of magnitude, I think, of potential kind of unlocked.
I mean, it feels like there are like sort of, in my mind, 3 different revolutions happening. If we time travel back to 2012 when we first worked together and you told me like, hey, Bitcoin is going to be worth, $50,000, $60,000. I mean, who knows where it is when people are actually watching this?
Yeah.
It might be millions by then, who knows, right?
Right.
I guess I just wouldn't believe you.
Yeah.
But that seems like the first revolution. And then the second one is, you could argue DeFi. Mm-hmm. So, and then the third, I mean, you've talked about this, it's probably just decentralized all organizations, social media and maybe government. I mean, there's sort of all 3 of these things all happening simultaneously.
Yeah. I think people still haven't fully appreciated, the different phases of crypto. They're still thinking about it. Most people in the world, if they've heard of crypto, are still thinking about Bitcoin as kind of like gold, digital gold. Okay, so it's some kind of like an investment you can make in some scarce thing. And that's really like phase 1 was like crypto as this new investment category. And then now we're seeing with DeFi, like the second phase, crypto as a new financial system, and all these pieces getting reinvented there with like lending and insurance and stuff like that, exchanges, all being recreated in a decentralized way. And then the third phase is probably crypto as this new internet application platform, which could be creating new identity systems, new like social media could get reinvented there. Like you were saying, governance, whether that's startups being recreated with like their cap tables, or even governments in some voting, like in all kinds of ways could be reinvented. So,
I mean, research, like with Research Hub.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good example where it's a startup that is creating a token to try to bring together a community. And it's like, what if, the early people listing their homes on Airbnb could have gotten a percentage of ownership in the company, or the early drivers on Uber, right? I think there's a lot of companies today, like the standard model most Silicon Valley companies do is like, they issue an option pool, like 10% or something. And like, they give those to the employees, and then they reissue the option pool as more employees come in. There's probably going to be, I think, companies in the future where they issue an option pool for employees and then an option pool for the customer base, because both are helping build this new thing. And you'll both basically the board will re-up both of them whenever they run out, but you'll end up with these new companies that are both owned by the customers and the employees and the investors. And so it'll be kind of enabling new things like that.
Yeah, I mean, Research Hub, for instance, is fascinating. I mean, I think you wrote one of the blog posts that posited what Research Hub could be. And I've been
helping that project get off the ground in kind of my free time, which is fun. It's helping me understand better, like, what is a crypto startup of the future really going to be like?
I think about that and think about what research organizations do. And these are some of the biggest, most important, most prestigious institutions out there. And then here's basically a decentralized autonomous organization that is a website that also has a coin. But then what's more important than just the coin is how people interact, how things get funded and what gets funded, and how does that actually push forward human knowledge.
Kind of like financial services we talked about was kind of mired in this bureaucracy and like legacy systems. And I think scientific research is kind of very similar in that regard. And it's very archaic the way that, a paper gets submitted to a journal, and like a journal takes a year to review it, and you have some three people you don't even know who peer review it, and maybe it gets accepted to this journal. And by the way, you have to pay the journal to submit your paper, and they charge the people reading it, and it's basically just a PDF. And why isn't scientific research happening more like open source software at that speed? We saw a glimpse of that happening during COVID, where people just started, because of the urgency, they started putting out their research on social media, and you'd get peer reviews the next day on Twitter or Medium or whatever. So I think that's the future. This whole idea of like getting the currency of academia is kind of citations. And I think it should actually be driven by something like ResearchCoin. That's like, if you're creating breakthrough innovation, or you're just helping curate or answer questions, or many ways that you could contribute to research, you should be accumulating a piece of ownership in something for that. Like the people who are making these breakthrough innovations, like CRISPR or whatever, it's like they should be billionaires in the way that startup founders are. So there's this big gap between like academic research, and then once in a while a breakthrough idea will like leap over into being commercialized. And a lot of wealth generation happens in startups when things are commercialized. Like frankly, Coinbase is an example of that. I read a research paper written by Satoshi Nakamoto. I thought, this is a great idea, I could probably help commercialize this. And a lot of the wealth got generated over here, but the people writing the research papers aren't generating the wealth, and so their fake currency is these citations. And there's no reason that needs to be the case. Like, why isn't a lot of research just published with some kind of a license? It's like, hey, if you want to commercialize this, give us 1% of the revenue for the first 10 years, or, and it's basically, there should be just a button that's like, license this.
Yeah.
Whereas today you have to go to these tech transfer offices at universities, and there's like tons of lawyers and bespoke processes. And it's like, let anybody just start doing the research and let anybody license it who wants to go commercialize it. Like there needs to be a well-oiled path between those two worlds, I think.
I guess that I'm just struck by how different a decentralized autonomous organization run by software, designed by like a deist creator, like someone who thinks about the needs of all the stakeholders and people involved, and then like writes code that then can sort of put like the right situation in place where like magic can happen. Like in Research Hub's case, what we hope is that Research Hub helps create like a whole wave of innovation and like pushes forward human knowledge. And I think it'll do it. I think that we will have like a generation of Einsteins, maybe in 10, maybe 20, but like probably sometime during our lifetimes, that can and will happen, maybe less and less in the auspices of a university, and maybe more and more in something totally decentralized like this.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think about YouTube, right? It's like YouTube started off and people would put like cat videos or like copyrighted material or whatever, and it was like kind of not taken seriously. But now YouTube is so big, it's like, it's better to have like 100,000 subscribers on YouTube than it is to have your own TV show on NBC or something. Like I don't watch NBC, but I watch YouTube all the time, right? So I think similarly, when you make these new systems, like it could be a DAO or Research Hub or whatever, a lot of the early participants, they're a little quirky, they're a little weird, they're on the fringes, right? They're probably not going to be, in Research Hub's case, like some tenured professor with like 30 years. They might be a grad student who's like kind of new in their career, who decides they want to take a bet on it. And by the way, a lot of the most active users on Research Hub are kind of like grad students and PhDs that are earlier in their career. So we're getting kind of stuff that's not being talked about sometimes in mainstream academia. I don't know. I mean, DAOs are an interesting thing. So the governance component makes sense for a DAO, and you can kind of have like money go in and proposals go into the DAO, and people can say, all right, I vote yes on this one, and the money should go here and there. But when I was creating, helping create Research Hub, I was thinking like, how is the actual product going to get built, right? Because the DAO is a kind of more esoteric concept, high level. And so we have Research Hub, a corporation, it's actually called Research Hub Technologies is the corporation, and it is a technology vendor to the DAO. So the DAO can have a vote and like decide to allocate money to this vendor, which is a C corporation, which actually, builds the website and the app and like pays the AWS bills and stuff. But it is a technology vendor to the thing which is the real company, so to speak, is the DAO. And so I don't claim to have this all fully figured out, but I'm experimenting more in this area because I do think DAOs are going to be really important in the future. And a lot of the, just like, all this case law had to get figured out around like a Delaware C Corp and that jurisdiction. The new jurisdiction is online, right? And I think DAOs are kind of like the Delaware C Corp of the cloud, which is where a lot of like the future is being built. So the DAO is almost like the real thing in my mind, and a Delaware C Corp just happens to be like a technology vendor that's providing services to it.
Yeah. It reminds me of the time Yuri Milner came to speak at YC, and of course people asked him, why did you invest in Facebook? And he said that all of the world is reforming into a global brain.
Yeah, that's kind of what the internet is.
Yeah. And then when you think about a DAO, that is actually, I guess it's a synapse or axon. It's sort of like a protocol for different cells in, this global brain to work together. That's not like centralized command and control.
Yeah, people talk about like, in science fiction, there's like these hive minds and stuff like that. And I think the internet is kind of turning human race into kind of more of a hive mind, because I look at like the number of WhatsApp or Signal groups that I'm in, and like the number of links that get sent every day, and compared to 3 years ago or even a year ago, and it's like it's kind of increasing, so that the information sharing amongst all these people in little groups or in large groups it's just going up and up. And so it is almost like we're creating a hybrid brain of some kind. Reading like some biologists and stuff, they talk about how human beings are like 90% chimpanzee and 10% ant or honeybee type colony mind. Like
Interesting.
We do have kind of a hive mind aspect to us. Like if you ever see like a bunch of people at a party dancing like all in unison, or people do like yoga where they're all moving in unison, and even
it's very natural. Like in our bodies, we can viscerally feel that experience.
Right. It's like even in companies, they do rituals like that sometimes, where everybody will do like a stand-up meeting, and we're like a little bit like an ant colony or honeybee nest or whatever, but we're also different.
Yeah. What do you think about this? When I think about decentralization, it does stand sort of against tyranny in a lot of ways. When you think about tyranny, you think about command and control, and then there are just, the worst things in perhaps human history come from like hubris or like too much control. And then, one of the salient artifacts of a decentralized autonomous org is that you can fork it.
Yeah.
And like if like the creator of the DAO no longer serves the wishes of the stakeholders, it's actually a lot easier. Like there are way fewer moats, and then that might actually be really good for humanity.
Yeah, totally. Balaji Srinivasan has this great talk on this, like, I think it's called Silicon Valley's Greatest Exit, but it's about the concept of voice versus exit. But yeah, if you can fork code or you can fork a DAO, that's very powerful. And I think about this for Coinbase too, because in some ways we're building this very centralized command and control top-down thing in a decentralized world. And so, I think there's some checks and balances against that, which is good. For instance, we're using the open crypto protocols. So if people decide they're unhappy with Coinbase someday, they can take all their crypto off Coinbase and put it somewhere else. There is a kind of freedom for people to leave, which creates a great sense of accountability. We're also we're making it easy for people to store their own crypto. I actually think self-custody of crypto is going to be a big deal in the future. Like it is already today, but it's going to be even bigger in the future. And we got started with people custodying crypto on Coinbase. There's still majority of people who come to us and institutional customers, they don't want to store their own crypto. It's too scary. But with things like Coinbase Wallet, we're making it easier and easier. There's like over 1 million people using it now that are like storing their own crypto, and that's even more decentralized, which I really like. So we're going to keep investing in that. And I'm thinking about that too. It's like, how do you create a company that stands the test of time? And I'm not planning to go anywhere, but someday if I pass away or whatever, it's like, how do you make sure that company has good values and makes good decisions? And so these are all really hard problems, which I don't feel like I have all the answers to, but yeah.
I think you have a new initiative. Is it called Coinbase 10%?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Coinbase 10%, which is taking 10% of your time and
resources,
and resources, and actually working on totally new things, perhaps like self-custody, that at the moment seem maybe far off, but now is really pretty core to what the product will be and is.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you brought that up. So yeah, actually Coinbase Wallet, our self-custody wallet, and Coinbase Commerce and other things we've created have come out of that 10% bucket. And when we were smaller as a company, a lot of those were really just coming from me. It's like, I got excited about something and I was like, let's make a team to go do it. But what I realized is that as we got bigger, it can actually be dangerous if I'm the gatekeeper, the bottleneck to creating these new kinds of applications. And so there's actually even been instances where people inside Coinbase, like entrepreneurial people, we have a lot of entrepreneurial employees, they've come and pitched me and been like, hey, I think we should build this, or I think we should build that. And I've either said, I don't think it's a good idea, or we don't have time right now, or whatever. They've left and those have become huge companies. Right?
Yeah, totally.
And so I think we're at a size now where we actually modeled it a little bit like after Y Combinator and things like that, where I don't want to have like a committee where you have to have 10 people say yes. Like that's basically the opposite of innovation, because a lot of innovative stuff is kind of contrarian. So
you need 10 believers. There should be 10 people who just go in and like, this is going to be it.
Yeah. So anyway, that's what we're doing with the 10% thing.
Yeah,
is like
awesome.
We're hosting our own little internal thing where if you're like 1, 2, or 3 employees or whatever, and you think this is a cool thing you want to spend your time on, you can pitch it to us. There's a couple options, right? We're open to any option. Like if you want to stay at Coinbase, have your Coinbase salary and equity, then you can keep that, and we'll own it. It's a Coinbase product. If you want to leave and work on it, Coinbase Ventures will invest, other Initialized can invest, anybody.
Totally, I'd love to.
And there's even maybe hybrid versions of that too, like who knows. I'm open to various ideas. So I'm trying to make sure we're a company that has innovation happening all the time now, and it's not stifled by us being too big or too bureaucratic, or like me having to think something is a good idea, because at this point, I'm pretty sure I'll miss out on like the next big thing. There's so many cool things happening in crypto.
I mean, that's awesome. I think that a lot of people who would be in your shoes and are in your shoes are like, I've made it. And then instead, what I'm hearing is like, this is actually a place to create the next thing. What goes through my head is like, I think that there's a strong chance that the things that 1 billion people use in the future, they'll all be, crypto native. They might be DAOs. And then the Coinbase, to me, sounds like one of the best. Like, if you don't have an idea already and are a great, builder, Coinbase is actually the place to go, because that's going to point you in the people networks, the capital networks, and then give you the culture and know-how to actually build the future that both of us want.
Yeah, I mean, I hope that's the case. I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I had a tutoring company I'd started. It didn't really work, and so I shut it down basically and sold it. I sold it. I didn't shut it down. But then I joined Airbnb, and so Airbnb was like it was doing well, it was growing, and I learned a lot, and I met interesting people, and that really helped me when I did have the right next idea. I went and did Coinbase, and that really helped me. And so I've tried to create Coinbase in a similar way, which is that I think anybody who they want to create a company at some point, or they just want to be a part of building something great inside Coinbase, like we want to welcome all those people. And I would, check out coinbase.com/careers. It's a great place to build not only like a career in crypto, but to learn the entrepreneurial skill set. And you could either get it funded internally or leave and do it. And like, we're totally happy either way.
There's this video that I'll probably overlay on here that I'm like very obsessed with, that like is my visual for sort of what you just said. So it starts with someone opening a bell pepper and taking one seed and putting it in the ground. And then you see like this time lapse of like a new plant sort of just grow out of the ground and like, blossom. And then it bears more bell peppers.
Yeah.
And then the cycle repeats.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is sort of the thing that, you've done and like can sort of keep doing, actually.
Totally. I mean, yeah, when I look back on like what was the thing I'm most grateful for in my life, it's probably a couple of people, like you being one of them, who kind of, when I was kind of didn't have any credit to my name or whatever, but I just had this goal or dream, and it was like somebody took a bet on me, and that actually enabled me to do what I wanted. And they saw the potential before I maybe even saw it myself. So I think that's what we wanted to kind of try to recreate, is like, how can we do that for a whole bunch more people? And especially once, like a lot of employees at Coinbase have recently gotten some liquidity, and how do you put capital to good use? It's like my belief about the world is that prosperity comes from innovation, and like innovation basically comes from there being more freedom in the world to go try new things with science and technology. And so if we have had some success here, like how do we pay that forward? How do we show people like this is something anybody can do, right? If they're determined enough or they want to go, do some variation of it. It doesn't have to be, nothing's exactly how I did it. Everyone's going to have their own path, but like go try it. Probably the first one won't work. I mean, I tried creating probably 10 different startups in my life. Coinbase was by far the one that worked the best, but like 8 of the 9 other ones failed, and one of them was like rounded to like basically 0, but it didn't completely fail. So it's like, try something, try anything. It almost certainly won't work, but you'll learn something. Try something else. It almost certainly won't work. Try it again. Like, go get a job somewhere and learn for a while and do it on nights and weekends or like whatever you need to do. And if people keep doing that and actually believe it's possible and have like some role models, then I think a lot of more startups will get created.
The crazy thing when I sit down and think about it is like when I first wrote, one of the first checks for your seed round, I didn't really know that was probably one of the first maybe 5 or 6 seed checks that I'd ever written.
That's awesome. I actually didn't know that. I thought you were like some like super experienced angel.
No, definitely not. I mean, I had paid my credit card off maybe like the year before.
Yeah.
I had to sell some secondary to Ashton Kutcher's just so that I had money to like pay for my wedding. And then I got hired at Y Combinator, and literally I had never done it before. And then obviously 9 years later, I am only super emboldened by this experience, because not only can any great builder build something that touches 1 billion people, but I mean, you can just keep doing it actually. Like we can actually keep making more and more of it happen. And it's the most growth mindset thing that exists on the planet actually.
Totally. I mean, that's like the really crazy thing is in some ways, okay, we've just had this really great outcome with the direct listing and everything, but it's not the end. It's actually like we're like 1% of the way into this thing, because now that I think a lot of people misinterpret this. Actually, there's a lot of negativity out there sometimes about like, oh, billionaires and like it's greedy and once you like have a place to live and food and stuff, like there's not that many things you can spend money on. And so how are you going to allocate that capital? Well, hopefully you're going to allocate it towards helping build more things, which will create more jobs and more economic growth. And like most of the people that I know that have gotten some amount of liquidity, whether from Coinbase or other things in life, they're actually like, they're not buying Lamborghinis or anything like that. They're actually like trying to think about how they can pay it forward, whether that's philanthropy or starting new businesses. Like both are really good ways to help the world.
Man, I don't know where else we can end. I mean, this is like, I hope this is the first of many times, honestly. I mean, every time we get to hang, I learn so much. And then honestly, just seeing how you're just continuing to grow, Coinbase, this is like 1%. It's like the progress bar and this is 1%. If this is 1%, like, good God, what will happen in the next 10 years? I mean, it'll be fantastic.
Well, hopefully it's all like fun. It's just fun to build stuff. And so I'm sure not everything that I try will go well. And like, I hope if I have some certain amount of money put away that I just don't need to worry about, like, my kids going to college or whatever, then I can take big risks with the rest of it. And we'll see what happens. I think it's fun. We'll try a lot of stuff and hopefully we can all be on Team Human, help things get better.
Yeah, I like that. Brian, thanks, man. Thanks for hanging out.
Thanks, Garry. Appreciate it.